Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The Room of Requirement is perhaps one of the most mysterious and simultaneously most useful places in all of Hogwarts. It can transform into anything to meet the desperate needs of whoever enters it. And yet, despite its wondrous abilities, there are many strange and illogical moments tied to this room in the Harry Potter books and films. Let's take a closer look and try to figure out why the Room of Requirement raises so many questions and why some of its features just don't add up within the logic of the magical world. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Why doesn't it always fulfill the wish? You'd think the room would respond perfectly to everyone's needs. But Voldemort, Harry, and Draco all sought a place to hide something important. And each of them ended up in the same version of the room. Voldemort's case is especially surprising. He hid a Horcrux there, relying on the room's magical secrecy, yet Harry found it without much effort. Does that mean the room failed its purpose? Or was the wording of the request too vague? Either way, the room didn't live up to expectations. Number 2. Why doesn't it always provide what's needed? When Draco Malfoy used the Room of Requirement to repair the vanishing cabinet, it took him weeks of trial and error. But wouldn't it have made more sense for the room to provide instructions, tools, or even magical guidance? If the room is meant to help those in need, then why did Draco have to face the entire challenge alone, one that required time, skill, and patience? It seems help is given selectively or with hidden conditions. Number 3. Why does it use the same room over and over? The junk storage version of the room, used by Draco, Harry, and even Voldemort, raises a valid question. Why does the Room of Requirement create the same setting for such different people? Every person is unique, and you'd expect the room to offer a personalized space, protected from intruders. But in reality, it's a shared area where anyone with the same intent can walk right in. So where's the magical privacy and security? Number 4. Why is it missing from the Marauders map? The Marauders map shows every person and every corner of Hogwarts, even the Chamber of Secrets if you know the password. But the Room of Requirement is mysteriously absent. Why? Either the Marauders never discovered it or the room magically hides itself from detection. But that seems unlikely. The 4 of them knew Hogwarts inside and out. How could none of them ever stumble upon it or hear about it from others? Number 5. Why is it so hard to find? To enter the room, you have to walk past a specific spot 3 times while focusing on your need. But that's an oddly specific requirement. How is someone supposed to guess that? Especially someone who truly needs help. It seems the room only assists the chosen few who happen to perform the exact ritual. At the very least, that's unfair. Number 6. How did the teachers not know about it? Dumbledore once mentioned stumbling upon the Room of Requirement when he needed a bathroom, and found one inside. But that raises a big question. How come the other professors who've lived at Hogwarts for decades know nothing about this room? They never noticed Dumbledore's army training there, never realized a Horcrux was hidden inside. It gives the impression that the professors don't even explore their own school. Number 7. Why didn't it survive Fiendfire? The Room of Requirement is a magical space that adapts to needs and withstands powerful spells. Duels took place there, complex magic was cast, and yet the room always held strong. Then came the moment when Fiendfire was unleashed, and the room was destroyed. Why? Couldn't such a powerful magical space withstand even that? It feels more like a narrative convenience than a consistent magical rule. Number 8. Why didn't it save Dumbledore? Albus Dumbledore once laughed that the Room of Requirement gave him a chamber pot when he needed it. But when he truly needed help, real, urgent, life or death help, the room did nothing. On the Astronomy Tower, weak and poisoned from drinking the cursed potion in Voldemort's Horcrux cave, Dumbledore stood face to face with Draco Malfoy, seconds from death. "Severus, please," he whispered. And still the room stayed hidden behind its wall. It didn't open a door, didn't provide a shield, didn't even flicker. The same room that could become a forest, a battlefield, a cathedral of forgotten objects offered Dumbledore no refuge, not even a second chance. He had walked its corridor before. He knew it existed. He had used it. And yet, when surrounded by Death Eaters, wandless and fading, it let him fall. One of the greatest wizards in history, one of Hogwarts' own, and the castle's most mysterious magic, simply watched. Number 9. Why doesn't it exist outside of Hogwarts? The Room of Requirement is one of the most powerful magical spaces in the wizarding world, yet it's stuck on the 7th floor of Hogwarts. It never appears anywhere else, not in the Ministry of Magic, not in number 12 Grimmauld Place, not even in St. Mungo's where help is needed every day. When Fred was dying, when the Order needed shelter, when students were on the run, imagine what one magical room could have done. But the room stayed locked in stone, a prisoner of its own corridor. The question burns brighter when you realize how versatile it is. A hidden sanctuary, a battlefield, a supply closet, a safe house. It became everything Harry and his friends needed, but only inside Hogwarts. Why? No explanation is given, no spell is mentioned to summon it elsewhere. As if the room were fused to the castle like a ghost that chooses to help only when it likes the bricks under its feet. Dobby once said, "The room will only appear when a person has real need of it." But need exists outside Hogwarts too. Sirius Black was trapped. Remus Lupin was poor and hunted. Newt Scamander wandered the world. Not one of them ever found a door where none existed. The Room of Requirement could have saved lives far beyond the classroom walls. Instead, it stayed in hiding, silent, immobile, and blind to every cry outside its ancient stone home. Number 10. Why doesn't it warn when it's already occupied? When Draco Malfoy used the Room of Requirement to repair the vanishing cabinet in Half-Blood Prince, it sealed itself off from everyone else. The door vanished. Not even Harry could get in. He walked the 7th floor corridor over and over again, but the wall stayed blank. "It's shut itself off," Hermione said. The room had made a decision. Someone was using it, and no one else was allowed in. But there was no sign, no warning, no flicker of magic to let others know it was occupied. What if Harry had needed the room to hide something? What if someone were hurt or in danger and couldn't access it because Draco happened to be inside? The room offered no message, no defense, no explanation. Just a locked silence. That's not just inconvenient, it's dangerous. In a school where dozens of students might need the room at any given time, why can't it say occupied, come back later? Even a bathroom gives more courtesy than that. The room is magical enough to read thoughts, reshape space, and create entire environments from nothing. But it can't leave a note on the wall, can't whisper a warning. Instead, it isolates itself completely as if embarrassed. Its silence nearly cost lives. It hid Draco's secret project. It allowed Pansy Parkinson to smuggle Death Eaters into the castle. All while Harry, Ron, and Hermione paced the hallway, unaware they were being locked out of the castle's most powerful secret. Number 11. What happens to objects when the room reshapes? The Room of Requirement changes its shape like a chameleon, but no one ever explains what happens to the things left behind. One day, it's a training ground for Dumbledore's army. The next, it's a storage dump, stretching endlessly in every direction. When students come and go, bringing objects, books, cushions, or even magical items, where do they end up when the room shifts? Are they erased, hidden, or merged into some secret, unreachable layer of the castle's mind? When Harry enters the room in Half-Blood Prince, looking to hide the Half-Blood Prince's potions book, he stumbles into a place that looks ancient, towering piles of forgotten furniture, vanished belongings, a vanishing cabinet, thousands of secrets buried in dust. The room was the size of a cathedral, the book says. So has it always been there, this junkyard? If so, why didn't anyone else ever discover it during regular use? When the DA practiced spells, they never tripped over old trunks or found a cursed tiara lying underfoot. It was as if the room had erased everything until it didn't. Draco Malfoy used that same version to repair the vanishing cabinet in Half-Blood Prince, meaning that some things do persist. But only in that version. When Harry used the room for the DA, it created something completely different. Fresh. Clean, as if no one had ever set foot there before. The school didn't just reuse space, it rewrote it. So what governs the logic of what stays and what vanishes? Why do some objects endure while others are wiped away? If the room stores every forgotten item, then it's more than a room. It's a memory, a living archive that picks and chooses what to keep. That tiara Harry saw on the bust. It turned out to be Ravenclaw's lost diadem, Voldemort's Horcrux, hidden for decades in plain sight, which means that some objects don't just vanish, they wait, quietly, and the room, for reasons unknown, decides which stories it keeps and which it buries forever. Number 12. Why didn't anyone use it to catch Sirius Black? During Harry's third year, Hogwarts became a fortress. Dementors circled the grounds. Teachers were on edge. The fat lady fled her portrait in terror. "He's here! Sirius Black's in the castle!" they shouted. Yet with all the panic and magical defences, no one thought to use the Room of Requirement. No one tried to summon a space that could trap, contain, or even reveal the location of a fugitive, a room that can become anything. Yet it was completely forgotten in the school's most paranoid hour. Professor McGonagall, Snape, even Dumbledore, each of them had the skill and knowledge to summon powerful magic. Dumbledore, in fact, had once encountered the room himself. He mentioned it offhand in Half-Blood Prince, saying he stumbled upon a room full of chamber pots when he needed one. So the question must be asked, why didn't he return to it when the stakes were higher? When a convicted murderer, believed to be Voldemort's closest ally, was loose inside his school. They didn't need to post Dementors at every entrance. They didn't need to fill the halls with tension. If someone had simply walked the 7th floor thinking, "I need a room to trap Sirius Black," the room could have delivered a perfect prison. Unbreakable walls, no windows, no doors. Instead, Sirius slipped through the cracks. He made it into Gryffindor Tower. He stood over Ron's bed. He escaped, not once, but twice, and the one magical tool that could have ended the hunt instantly, it stayed closed. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they didn't trust it, or maybe the room chooses who can ask. Because if the greatest headmaster of the century didn't think to use it, there must be something darker at play. Some hidden rule. Some silent refusal. The Room of Requirement doesn't just demand need, it demands the right kind of need. Or else it remains nothing but a blank wall in a hallway full of blind spots. Number 13. Why didn't it reveal itself to Harry earlier? Harry Potter nearly died at least once a year. In his first year, he faced Professor Quirrell and Voldemort. In his second, he entered the Chamber of Secrets alone. Third year, he confronted a werewolf and 100 Dementors. The fourth, Voldemort returned, and Harry saw Cedric Diggory murdered. But through all of this, the Room of Requirement stayed hidden. Not a whisper, not a door, not a shadow in the hallway. For someone who needed help more than anyone else at Hogwarts, Harry was left completely alone. The room finally appeared in his 5th year, and not even because of him. It was Dobby who gave him the idea. A house elf had to guide the chosen one to salvation. "Dobby knows a place," he squeaked, in Order of the Phoenix. That's how Harry found the space for Dumbledore's army. But why did it take so long? He'd been wandering these halls since age 11. He'd fought a troll, faced a basilisk, survived the Triwizard Tournament, and only now did the room feel he was in need. Imagine if the room had appeared in his second year, when Hermione was petrified, when Harry thought he was losing his mind, hearing voices in the walls, when no adult seemed to believe him. The room could have offered safety, books, clues, something. Instead, Harry had to follow spiders into the forbidden forest and speak Parseltongue, into a sink. Help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it, Dumbledore once said, but what if they don't know what to ask? It raises a brutal question. Is the room waiting not for danger, but for a perfectly phrased request? Does it care less about saving lives and more about testing cleverness? If so, it's not the room of requirement, it's the room of riddles, and Harry, more than anyone, had to suffer through 4 years of near-death experiences before the castle decided he was worthy of a magical shortcut. Number 14. Why doesn't the room help those in danger? When Harry Potter faced death in his very first year at Hogwarts, the room of requirement remained silent. Professor Quirrell, possessed by Lord Voldemort, was ready to kill a first-year student in cold blood. Harry wandered through the castle alone, entered the trapdoor, faced trials, and ultimately stood before the mirror of Erist with no backup. The castle was full of magic, full of protection, full of mystery, but the room of requirement did nothing, not even a whisper of help. Isn't that exactly the kind of moment the room was meant for? It gets worse in the second year. A basilisk roamed the halls, petrifying students one by one. Colin Creevey, Justin Finch-Fletchley, even Hermione Granger. The castle lived in fear. Students were confined to dormitories, and Dumbledore himself was removed from the school. But again, the room did nothing. Not a safe space, not a warning, not even a lantern. Tom Riddle's diary was manipulating Ginny Weasley, and the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets lay open beneath their feet. "The monster will not attack me," wrote Tom through Ginny's shaking hands. Still, the room stayed quiet, watching. Even during the Triwizard Tournament, with dangers designed by Mad-Eye Moody, who was actually Barty Crouch Jr., the room was missing in action. When Harry was dragged into a graveyard to witness the resurrection of Voldemort, he didn't even know the room existed, and it certainly didn't offer to help. A space that can become anything. Anything. But it didn't become a door, a warning, or a sword. Not even when Voldemort touched down on Hogwarts soil again, in the 5th book. So what is the room really? A magical entity with perfect ears but selective empathy. Does it only appear to those who say the right words in the right moment? If so, it's more a puzzle box than a sanctuary. In Order of the Phoenix, Dobby tells Harry, sometimes it is there and sometimes it is not, only when someone has real need of it. But is that really true? Because it seems the room doesn't hear cries for help, only clever commands. Number 15. Why can't you enter it from the outside once it's active? When Draco Malfoy began repairing the vanishing cabinet inside the Room of Requirement during his 6th year at Hogwarts, he unknowingly highlighted one of the most frustrating magical limitations in the school. The moment someone activates the room, it seals itself off to everyone else. Hermione Granger, ever curious and analytical, tried desperately to locate Draco's whereabouts during that period. But each time they walked past the 7th floor corridor, the wall remained blank. No door appeared. The room refused to reveal itself. It had been activated by someone else, and that meant no entry, no exceptions. This rule wasn't just an annoyance, it became a tangible obstacle. Dumbledore's army had once thrived within the room's enchanted walls. Harry, Hermione, and Ron had relied on its loyalty, its silence, its ability to create what they most needed. But the room's exclusivity became a paradox. It was meant to serve students in need, and yet it turned away everyone else when one user had already claimed it. Why would such an advanced, sentient room not adapt to multiple needs at once? Hogwarts, a school with hundreds of students, surely had more use for a replicable room of requirement than a single-occupant sanctuary. The room's refusal to be accessed by multiple people became not just an issue of comfort, but of security and equality. Consider the sheer volume of students needing shelter, training, or privacy. When Dumbledore's army regrouped during the Carrow's tyranny in Harry's 7th year, Neville Longbottom was the first to seek refuge in the room. As he described in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, "The room's been letting people in and it's been providing food and bedding and a place to hide." But what if Neville hadn't been first? What if someone less noble, or even a Death Eater, had gained control of the room? Everyone else would have been locked out. One choice, one person, meant exclusion for all others. Draco Malfoy's use of the room during Half-Blood Prince is perhaps the clearest demonstration of this limitation. The room did not allow Harry or anyone else to breach it, despite the urgency of the situation. Draco was plotting the assassination of Albus Dumbledore, a conspiracy that placed the entire school in danger, and yet the room protected his privacy absolutely. Even the Marauder's map couldn't locate him, rendering Harry's pursuit nearly futile. The room didn't ask who needed it most. It responded only to the first person to walk by in desperation. There was no ranking of intention, no ethical judgment, just magical exclusivity. And this is the heart of the discomfort. The room of requirement, despite being magical, intelligent, and deeply attuned to human need, lacks the nuance to serve more than one person or group at a time. It locks itself away like a secret. And in a world where Dumbledore's army was practicing defensive spells to survive, it seems deeply unfair that one student's personal project, no matter how desperate, could shut down such a vital resource for others. "You can't get in if someone else is using it," Hermione noted in frustration, summarizing the room's loyalty to the first visitor. That loyalty, admirable though it is, becomes a liability when others are in equally desperate need. If the room can create an entire dueling arena, walls padded for spell absorption, targets that react to jinxes, and even broomsticks for practice, surely it could manage parallel versions of itself, or, at the very least, a duplicate entrance that leads to a different dimension. After all, it's not as though Hogwarts lacks magical architecture. The grand staircase moves, the paintings interact, and even the house elves operate under arcane logic that makes them more effective than any Muggle mechanism. Why, then, is the Room of Requirement so monolithic, so possessive of its own presence? The case of Draco's vanishing cabinet repair wasn't a mere footnote. It actively prevented students from potentially discovering the dangerous link he was creating between Hogwarts and Borgin and Berks. The room became a blind spot for the entire staff. Not even Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard in the school, could override its enchantments. "There are some things even I cannot access," he once said, and this room, it seems, was one of them. That's not only a limitation, it's a hazard. Even more unsettling is how little the room reveals about its own nature. When Harry first discovered it in Order of the Phoenix, it gave them cushions, books, and a chalkboard for instruction. It even mimicked Moody's classroom setup. But at no point did it offer any sort of guidance about how its rules worked. They had to learn everything by trial and error, by pacing past it 3 times, by focusing on a specific need. Why couldn't the rooms speak or write down its boundaries? Why such mystery for something designed to help? There's a quiet irony in the way the room's behavior mirrors the very essence of Hogwarts itself. Both the school and the Room of Requirement operate under a veil of secrecy and loyalty. The castle chooses its own loyalties: walls that close, passages that open only for the right passwords, staircases that shift without warning. But while most of these quirks add charm, the room's exclusivity feels oppressive. In times of war or even school-wide crisis, it simply doesn't make sense that no override exists. Imagine if Madame Pomfrey's hospital wing refused to open because one student was inside. The uproar would be immediate. The situation grows even more ludicrous when considering that the room is not a fixed location. It reshapes itself depending on need. It became a bathroom for Dumbledore, a storage room for generations of hidden contraband, and a training ground for Harry and his friends. Yet in all this flexibility, it cannot split its focus. It's like a library that becomes inaccessible if one person is already reading inside. This goes against the very spirit of education, which should be about shared knowledge and collective safety. Number 16. Why isn't it protected against dark magic? When Vincent Crabbe unleashed the Fiendfire curse in the Room of Requirement, the consequences were not just tragic. They were baffling. The very chamber that had protected, provided, and seemingly possessed a will of its own collapsed into roaring flames, unable to contain the magical inferno it had witnessed. Crabbe, who did not fully comprehend the magnitude of the spell he was casting, lost his life in the flames. The room, known for its adaptability and mystery, was consumed along with him. But the real question that lingers is not merely about Crabbe's recklessness, it's about the room itself. How could such an ancient and powerful magical space be so thoroughly undone by one burst of dark magic? The Room of Requirement had been a sanctuary for years, yet in the face of Fiendfire it offered no protection, no escape, and no sign of its famed adaptability. The silence of its magic in that critical moment remains one of the most troubling mysteries in the world of Harry Potter. Throughout Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the Room of Requirement showed signs of intelligent responsiveness. It produced precisely what Draco Malfoy needed for his secret operations: spacious concealment for the Vanishing Cabinet and an entrance guarded by intention alone. Later, during Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it became a fortress for Dumbledore's army, sheltering Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood. It generated beds, food, plumbing, and even a passage to the Hogshead in Hogsmeade. The room, it seemed, could not only read the needs of its occupants, it could materialize solutions that bordered on miraculous. So why, when Crabbe summoned a deadly fire curse, did the room do nothing? Why didn't it extinguish the flames, teleport the students to safety, or simply prevent the use of such dangerous magic within its walls? The nature of the room had always been shrouded in enigma. Albus Dumbledore once discovered it as a chamber filled with chamber pots, suggesting it could materialize even the most trivial needs. Years later, Harry discovered it as a perfect training ground for Dumbledore's army. The room shifted form, purpose, and layout according to the desires of the one in need. And yet this adaptability seemed to reach its end in the face of destructive power. The room's silence during the Fiendfire incident implies limitations in its sentience or in the scope of its enchantments. A space that could birth entire passages and mimic structural complexity could not resist the ancient curse Crabbe cast without control. This failure raises an uncomfortable question. Was the room ever truly sentient, or was its magic simply a mechanical response to intention? The Fiendfire curse, described in the Deathly Hallows, is no ordinary magic. It creates an all-consuming living flame capable of incinerating even Horcruxes. Hermione Granger herself warned against using it due to its uncontrollable nature. "You'd have to be a real expert at dark magic to control it," she said. The curse conjures not just fire, but monstrous forms, serpents, chimeras, and dragons that hunt their targets with predatory determination. As Crabbe's Fiendfire engulfed the towering junk within the room, it grew sentient and uncontrollable, demonstrating the magnitude of the spell. But even if the Fiendfire was beyond Crabbe's control, shouldn't the room have had safeguards against such violent magic? Why could such an ancient space not neutralize or deflect such a well-known dark curse? Magic in the wizarding world is often depicted as layered, wards over wards, enchantments that overlap and respond to threat. Hogwarts itself is protected by countless defensive spells. It repels apparition, shields itself from muggle detection, and guards its grounds with protective enchantments laid down over centuries. The Room of Requirement is part of Hogwarts. It is hidden within its walls, ancient enough to predate many of the students and staff who discover it. Would it not follow that this room too shares in the school's protective matrix? The idea that it would stand defenseless in the face of catastrophic dark magic suggests either oversight in its creation or a deeper, unspoken truth, that its magic is not protective but reactive, a passive mirror to desire rather than a guardian of those who enter. One might argue that the room was merely responding to the collective will of its users. Crabbe, Draco, and Goyle entered the room with the intention of catching Harry Potter. The room, in its version of the Room of Hidden Things, reflected that pursuit, offering a chaotic, cluttered labyrinth of forgotten objects. But what about Harry's presence? His need to find the diadem of Ravenclaw, a Horcrux, was desperate. Wouldn't the room have prioritized survival for someone trying to destroy a great evil? Wouldn't it have sensed the ancient darkness Harry carried and responded to the gravity of the mission? The room's silence, again, is more than troubling. It is unnatural. There is precedent for rooms in Hogwarts being enchanted with intelligent protections. The headmaster's office is locked with magical passwords. The Chamber of Secrets was hidden with Parseltongue and deadly beasts. The Department of Mysteries is filled with rooms that behave unpredictably and dangerously. And yet the Room of Requirement, arguably the most mysterious of all, seems to lack even a basic layer of protection against a spell that destroys everything in its path. It did not prevent Crabbe from casting Fiendfire. It did not neutralize the curse once cast. It did not open an emergency exit when the flames began to devour its contents. The same room that had created hidden staircases and secret passages in the past now simply burned. Number 17. Why wasn't it used in the Third Wizarding War? After the smoke of the Battle of Hogwarts cleared and the bodies were buried, the school that had once been both fortress and sanctuary stood in ruins, but not defeated. It was rebuilt, stone by stone, memory by memory. New generations would one day walk those halls, unaware of the horrors witnessed in the Room of Requirement during the war's final hours. Neville Longbottom still bore the scars from those months in hiding, cuts, bruises, the ghost of starvation, but he never once returned to the room that had saved them. No one did. Not even Hermione Granger, the greatest mind of her age, spoke again of that miraculous space, the very room that had fed, sheltered, and hidden dozens of students and rebels became a ghost story, fading into the shadows of magical history. Why? The Room of Requirement was not simply a room, it was a living, breathing part of Hogwarts, responding to the needs of those who walked its halls. It had conjured a sanctuary for Dumbledore's army, complete with beds, a kitchen, even plumbing. It had created entire libraries, supply caches, and secret passageways. In the final hours before Voldemort's siege, it produced the lost diadem of Ravenclaw, having concealed it for centuries. This room was more than enchanted architecture. It was sentient, ancient, and loyal to the castle's heart. And yet, after Voldemort's defeat, it was never seen again. The silence surrounding the room's post-war existence is baffling. After all, the magical community had every reason to embrace such a space. The Ministry was in shambles, Diagon Alley had been damaged, and hundreds of families had lost their homes. If there was ever a time to use the Room of Requirement to provide refuge, it was then. Kingsley Shacklebolt, newly appointed as Minister for Magic, led a campaign of reconstruction and justice, but even he never referenced the room in speeches or decrees, and Shacklebolt, who had fought at Hogwarts, surely knew what the room had done. It wasn't just a refuge, it was a miracle. During the battle, the room had allowed Hogwarts defenders to slip out through the hidden passage to the Hog's Head. It created food in times of hunger. It healed the wounded when no Mediwitches could enter. For months, it had kept Neville, Seamus, Ginny, and others alive. If the room could do that during a time of war, imagine what it could have done during a time of fragile peace. Loss, or abandonment, of the room seems all the more suspicious when one considers that the school was fully rebuilt. Hogwarts magic is self-healing to a degree, but repairs of that magnitude required the best spellcraft of the age. Surely someone like Professor Flitwick or even Hermione herself would have checked on the state of the room, but there's no record, no anecdote, not even a rumour. It's as though the room of requirement had ceased to exist the moment it was no longer needed. But that cannot be true. The room survived its own destruction once. When Vincent Crabbe released Fiendfire in a fit of panic, engulfing the entire space in demonic flame, Harry was convinced it had been destroyed. But that was only one of its many forms, a specific manifestation to house the diadem. Later that same night, the room still allowed others to enter it for escape. It adapted, it survived. If it could endure Fiendfire, it could certainly exist beyond the war, yet no one returned. There's a strange kind of forgetting that happens after trauma. Survivors often erase the things that remind them of their darkest hours. The room had been their salvation, but it was also their prison. Neville had once whispered to Harry, "It's not just a hiding place, it listens to you." That intimacy, that eerie sentience, might have been too much to bear after the war. For some, the room had been a tomb where friends died and silence reigned. Perhaps they couldn't face it again. But practical needs should outweigh emotion. In the years following Voldemort's fall, the wizarding world faced new challenges. Magical orphanages were overwhelmed, curse damage was widespread. The room of requirement could have been a temporary hospital, a classroom, or a safe zone for those escaping post-war purges. If it could produce whatever one needed most, why was it not used to train young Aurors or help rehabilitate damaged minds like those of the Longbottoms? Consider the case of St. Mungo's Hospital. Overflowing with patients, limited by both funding and staff, the hospital struggled to meet post-war demands. Hermione, who later worked in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, was part of several reform initiatives, yet she never once proposed using the room. This is the same woman who fought for house elf rights and established Muggle-born protections. The omission is glaring. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the Room of Requirement is described as a place where everything hidden is found. For a society trying to rebuild, to recover, to find itself again, was there any more perfect place? Why, then, was it left behind? One can't help but wonder if its magic became too unpredictable after the war. Perhaps it sensed too much fear, too much grief, and locked itself away. Magic is emotional. Wand cores respond to feeling. The castle itself seemed to mourn Dumbledore after his death. What if the room did the same? Then again, perhaps there were those who feared what the room might reveal. It is, after all, the very chamber that held the diadem of Ravenclaw, a Horcrux hidden in plain sight for nearly a century. What else did it hide? What secrets from the founders, from the castle's founders, or even the Dark Lord himself? Could it be that certain powerful figures decided it was safer to let the room vanish quietly than to let its contents fall into the wrong hands? Number 18. Why doesn't the room have a will of its own? The Room of Requirement is one of the most powerful and mysterious magical phenomena in the entire Harry Potter universe, capable of manifesting almost any physical reality based on the user's most urgent needs. It creates entire landscapes, conjures thousands of items, and reshapes its walls, size, and function, seemingly without limit. It has hidden Dumbledore's army from the cruel eyes of Dolores Umbridge, created an immense junk-filled maze for Draco Malfoy to hide the vanishing cabinet, and provided a place for the Order of the Phoenix to regroup. And yet, for all its might and versatility, the room remains silent. It never speaks, it never gives advice, it never warns of danger. Unlike the Sorting Hat or even some enchanted mirrors, it possesses no voice, no personality, and no opinion. It is a servant with divine powers, and this contradiction is unsettling. When Harry first discovers the room thanks to Dobby's guidance, it appears as a place filled with cushions, perfect for secret meetings and spell practice. Later, it transforms into a bathroom for Dumbledore, a hiding place for the Half-Blood Prince's book, and even a gateway between Hogwarts and the outside world in Deathly Hallows. The transformations are stunningly precise, responding to desires and fears so deeply held they don't even need to be voiced aloud. But as the room shifts from one reality to another, it never communicates anything back. Its silence is not just practical, it feels eerie. Here is a magical space that seems almost omniscient, and yet it does not act outside the boundaries of a user's immediate thoughts. It obeys, but it does not question. It provides, but it does not judge. It waits, but it does not hope. This passivity stands in stark contrast to other magical entities in the wizarding world. The Sorting Hat, for instance, is not only aware of its function, but freely discusses the implications of its decisions. It debates internally, questions the student's qualities, and sometimes even compromises with the wearer. You could be great, you know, it's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness, it tells Harry in the first book. The hat isn't just a tool, it's a character with agency. It expresses preference and occasionally even dread. Portraits within Hogwarts, such as Phineas Nigellus Black or the Fat Lady, also show deep emotion, historical knowledge, and even loyalty to certain people or ideas. They are remnants of consciousness, yes, but they are far from silent. The Room of Requirement, however, possesses none of this expressiveness, even when it decides not to open for someone, such as when Draco locks it down to prepare his deadly task. It does so without explanation or emotion. Harry never knows whether the room is acting out of loyalty, neutrality, or simple magical protocol. There's a particularly odd moment in The Half-Blood Prince when Harry needs the room to reappear and it doesn't. He walks past the same section of wall multiple times but cannot gain access. Later, he discovers Draco has monopolized the room's function, turning it into a mechanical and utilitarian labyrinth. But the room never offers a warning, never shifts to whisper, "Danger is here." It is as if it refuses to recognize patterns or consequences. This absence of selfhood is strange because the room exhibits behavior that borders on intentionality. When it creates an entire warehouse-like version of itself for students to hide objects over centuries, it arranges things in a very deliberate way. The diadem of Ravenclaw, cursed by Voldemort, is hidden in a place of honor, atop a bust, on a cabinet, elevated. This isn't random placement. It suggests a certain logic, even reverence. But it remains purely interpretive. Was it the room's choice to place the diadem so carefully? Or was it simply recreating what the hider imagined it should be? The answer is never clear. Why does this matter? Because in a world where magic often mirrors emotion and consciousness, the room's silence becomes deafening. The Mirror of Erist, for example, shows not what we ask, but what we deeply want. Dumbledore warns Harry, "It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live." This is the voice of a teacher, but also of a world where even objects try to instruct. Even the cursed diary of Tom Riddle speaks with charm, manipulation, and eventually horror. The Room of Requirement, by contrast, is mute in its omnipotence. It could be the ultimate protector or the final manipulator, but it remains neutral. The idea of a magical object that obeys without personality may seem comforting at first. It cannot betray, it cannot argue, but it also cannot intervene when disaster looms. In Deathly Hallows, the room becomes the last sanctuary for the resistance within Hogwarts. It connects with Aberforth Dumbledore's tavern, provides food, bedding, even warmth. It is everything the students need, except it does not warn them that it also holds the most dangerous Horcrux, or that Fiendfire, once unleashed, will consume it. It does not lock down the diadem, hide it deeper, or even prevent its own destruction. It simply reflects what it is asked. This passivity might stem from magical design. Perhaps the Room of Requirement was not created as a sentient being, but as a magical construct with adaptive algorithms. It's a tool, not a thinker. But that explanation fails to satisfy when we look at the depth of transformation it can perform. It doesn't just change into rooms, it mimics needs down to the finest emotional textures. In one instance, it creates a room filled with chamber pots when Dumbledore needs a toilet. In another, it provides Harry with a room full of tools, dummies, and cushions. Such precise emotional calibration suggests something beyond mere mechanical magic. There is also the question of legacy. Who created the room? Hogwarts was founded 1,000 years ago by 4 powerful wizards: Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Salazar Slytherin, and Rowena Ravenclaw. Did one of them design this room? If so, why did they not give it a voice like the Sorting Hat, which also comes from the founders? Is the room meant to be a mirror rather than a companion? Perhaps the magic embedded within it was too dangerous to risk adding a mind. A room with will could easily become tyrannical. If it began to decide who deserved help, its moral compass would dominate its function, and that could undermine the principle of neutrality that Hogwarts tries, however poorly, to uphold. And yet this silence leaves students vulnerable. When Harry hides the Half-Blood Prince's potions book in a cabinet, he marks it with a statue and assumes it will remain undisturbed. But he doesn't know what else lies within. Thousands of students have hidden things there for centuries. The room could have revealed that danger. It could have warned about dark magic, but it did not. Again, it followed, it mirrored, it obeyed. The tragedy of the Room of Requirement may be that it is too perfect a servant. Like a house elf bound to command, it responds without judgment. Like Dobby before his freedom, the room knows more than it is allowed to say. If it had spoken, perhaps Harry would have known the dangers of the cursed diadem. If it had offered warning, perhaps Crabbe would not have perished in the fiend fire he unleashed. If it had possessed will, perhaps it would have locked itself, refused to shelter a Horcrux, or defended the castle from within. But it didn't. It is a room of silence, of transformation, but not of voice. It fulfills needs, but not wisdom. It adapts to the seeker, not to the truth. That is its magic, and its flaw. For in a world where knowledge is power and information can mean life or death, a room that never speaks may be the most dangerous kind of magic there is. Number 19. Why has no one studied the room's magic? The Room of Requirement appeared when it was needed, but never when it was wanted. It was a place of comfort, of secrecy, of transformation, and of power. During Harry Potter's years at Hogwarts, the room offered sanctuary to Dumbledore's army, stored ancient, forgotten artifacts, and even served as a hiding place for the cursed diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. And yet no scholar, professor, or official ever systematically studied this phenomenon. It remains one of the most underexplored magical anomalies in the wizarding world, cloaked in shadows even within the supposedly enlightened walls of Hogwarts. The room was capable of conjuring objects, altering its structure, and adapting its very nature to suit the innermost desires of the person seeking it. When Dobby brought Harry there in Order of the Phoenix, it manifested as a fully equipped training hall, complete with cushions, books, and a whistle for Neville. Later, it became a lavatory for Dumbledore, a secret storeroom for centuries of forgotten Hogwarts contraband, and a fully functional room for sleep, rest, and survival during the Second Wizarding War. If the magical world documented and regulated magical creatures, enchanted artifacts, and even minor hexes, why then did no one probe the Room of Requirement? In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry recalls that the Room of Requirement could change to become whatever the seeker needed it to be. This quote, simple on the surface, hints at an immensely complex magical construct. How did the room read intent? How did it distinguish between need and want? Was it tied to legilimency, to emotion, to magical signatures? These were questions ripe for academic inquiry. Yet no one, not even Dumbledore, who seemed to know more than he let on, ever documented an attempt to analyze or understand the room's core enchantments. Albus Dumbledore, who once remarked casually that he used the room to find a bathroom, offered no signs that he had taken any scholarly interest in it. This is particularly strange given his penchant for arcane and esoteric studies. Dumbledore was deeply interested in the magical properties of love, sacrifice, and even blood. Yet a room that could spontaneously respond to emotional or physical need drew no scrutiny from him. Either he knew something and deliberately concealed it, or the room operated outside the bounds even of his intellectual curiosity, a notion that feels at odds with his character. The Department of Mysteries, which examined magical enigmas like time, death, and thought, never laid claim to the room. The unspeakables dealt with dangerous and unpredictable forces. Surely the Room of Requirement, which could become a battleground, a trap, a storage facility of cursed objects, merited their attention. But if they ever set foot in that corridor on the 7th floor, there is no record of it. Unlike the Vanishing Cabinet, which caused enough trouble to warrant notice from Filch, and even became a tool for Death Eater infiltration, the Room of Requirement remained unregulated, as if protected by collective forgetfulness. There is evidence that even the founders themselves may not have fully understood what they built. Rowena Ravenclaw's lost diadem, a relic of unmatched intelligence-enhancing properties, found its way into the room centuries ago, hidden by Tom Riddle. If the room had existed since the school's founding, was it built by the founders or did it emerge spontaneously? And if so, is it even a traditional room at all, or rather a sentient magical entity bound to the castle? The idea is not as far-fetched as it sounds in a world where paintings talk, staircases move, and the castle appears to shift in response to moods and seasons. One must remember how many powerful objects were stored in the room. When Harry hides his potions book, he notes a place the size of a cathedral crammed with cauldrons, broomsticks, cabinets, and dozens of other forgotten magical items. This stockpile likely included cursed objects, banned potions, and dangerous enchantments. Why wasn't it ever inspected? Why didn't the Hogwarts governors, known for their concern with student safety, order an audit? After all, a single jinxed opal necklace was enough to cause chaos in the castle, yet no one worried about a hidden chamber filled with such items. It's possible that fear played a role. The magical community has always had an odd relationship with what it cannot explain. Divination, for instance, is routinely ridiculed despite clear instances of true prophecy. The Room of Requirement, being uncharted and independent, might have intimidated those who sensed its potential. It could not be placed under surveillance, its contents catalogued, or its entrance made permanent. Even Hermione, who adored magical theory, never once suggested they try to understand the mechanics of the room. Her only concern was how to access it, never how it worked. There's also the possibility of magical self-protection. The room may resist being known. When Harry returns to it in the Deathly Hallows, its form is unfamiliar and foreboding. It becomes a lethal maze of shifting structures during the final battle, killing Vincent Crabbe through his own misused magic. Perhaps any sustained attempt to study or dismantle it triggers defense mechanisms. Maybe someone did try long ago, and their failure was erased with them. In a castle built with secrets, one more mystery might have simply devoured its own record. Kreacher and the house elves knew of the room. Dobby found it without trouble. The elves, bound to Hogwarts by ancient magic, may have access to secrets humans are never meant to see. Yet no witch or wizard ever asked them what they knew. In a culture that often dismisses the intelligence of non-human beings, the elves' knowledge was likely overlooked or undervalued. Had anyone questioned them, the room's origins, or at least its behavior over centuries, might have been pieced together. But silence endured, possibly out of arrogance, possibly out of fear. Even in war, the room's capabilities were unmatched. It provided food and warmth for students hiding from Death Eaters. Aberforth Dumbledore sent supplies through a secret passage connected to his pub. The room, in essence, created a pocket universe linked to the outside world through unknown magical pathways. This detail alone should have drawn scholarly alarm. How many other locations could it access? Could it be used for smuggling, for escape, for time travel? Did it follow rules or did it make them? Was it a piece of magic or a living thing? The very fact that it can vanish when not needed makes it nearly immune to oversight. A magical anomaly that hides itself is far harder to regulate. The Ministry had countless rules for the misuse of magic, but what rules could they impose on something they couldn't even find? Still, there are precedents. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures once tried to classify the Room of Requirement as a sentient magical space, according to a theory published in the Practical Hexa. But the theory was dismissed as speculative and quietly removed from circulation. Consider that during all of Harry's years at Hogwarts, the room was used not just by students, but likely by staff and others before them. Yet the Marauder's map, detailed and enchanted as it was, never showed the Room of Requirement. Fred and George Weasley never noticed it, despite their extensive exploration of the school's secret passageways. Its magical concealment went beyond invisibility. It bordered on intentional omission. That kind of power requires examination, or perhaps avoidance. Tom Riddle, the most obsessive student in Hogwarts history, discovered the room and used it. He placed a fragment of his soul inside it in the form of a Horcrux, knowing its secrecy would shield him. If Riddle, cunning and calculating, saw its value, why didn't Dumbledore, or did he? Perhaps the silence around the Room of Requirement is not ignorance, but deliberate containment. Perhaps Dumbledore or others before him decided the room was too dangerous to probe, too ancient to explain, and too sentient to trust. And then there is the moral question. Should the Room of Requirement be studied at all? If it is alive in some way, if it responds to need and emotion and desperation, then studying it might violate its very purpose. Turning the room into a subject of analysis could corrupt its function. Maybe it exists only because no one forces it to exist. Magic, in its purest form, often defies logic, and perhaps the Room of Requirement is the ultimate expression of that defiance, surviving only in the absence of inquiry. The wizarding world is full of enigmas, but few are as actively ignored as the Room of Requirement. Its silence echoes louder than any prophecy, its walls hold more secrets than any pensive. Whether forgotten by design or by fear, it remains a paradox, the most helpful magic no one dares to understand. And perhaps, in that ignorance, lies the only reason it still exists. Number 20. Why doesn't the room filter out evil intentions? In the shadowy silence of Hogwarts, nestled in the 7th floor corridor across from a tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, the Room of Requirement has long been a symbol of quiet salvation. It opens only when someone truly needs it, reshaping itself with uncanny precision to meet the exact demands of its seeker. But while this magic seems wondrous, even benevolent, it also carries a disquieting ambiguity. The room does not discriminate, it does not judge, it merely obeys, and in that obedience lies its most chilling flaw. When Draco Malfoy walked its floor, burdened by fear, desperation, and deadly purpose, the room did not hesitate. It gave him what he needed, an exact replica of the vanishing cabinet in Borgin and Burke's, a door for evil, a portal for Death Eaters. Draco was not seeking refuge or healing. He was not hoping to protect, to create, or to recover. He was trying to repair a pathway that would allow Voldemort's followers to infiltrate the heart of the magical world's last bastion. Yet the room, that silent sentinel of student needs, did not raise a barrier. It did not sense danger or weigh consequences. It merely provided the very same enchantment that once conjured blankets for a cold, trembling Dobby now helped arm the agents of terror. This contradiction demands uncomfortable questions. If the Room of Requirement truly exists to help, why does it not differentiate between noble and wicked intent? The event is not a subtle one, not hidden in dusty footnotes of lore. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, we we see Draco frequenting the room, slipping away in secret. Malfoy was going in there every day, Harry observed. The boy was on a mission given directly by Lord Voldemort, a task to either kill Dumbledore or die trying. The cabinet, once broken, needed to be restored so that Death Eaters could bypass the magical protections around Hogwarts. And the room, a room that once transformed into a battlefield of cushions for Dumbledore's army, or a hidden lavatory for Fred and George, allowed it. This is not a question of oversight, it's a question of intent. The room reads desire, it responds to necessity, but necessity in the hands of someone like Draco becomes a weapon. Should a magical space so profoundly attuned to human need not also be attuned to human morality? Hogwarts itself is saturated with enchantments that shield its students from harm. Portraits watch, staircases shift, teachers enforce rigid rules, yet the room of requirement is a loophole in this fortress, an open window through which the storm may enter. Draco's success nearly destroyed Hogwarts from the inside. His actions, empowered by the room, led directly to the night atop the astronomy tower. There, with students asleep in their beds, the unthinkable happened. Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of his time, died not in battle, but in ambush. And the room, unknowingly, or perhaps indifferently, served as the accomplice. It had granted Draco the tools. It had allowed evil to creep into the sanctuary of children. What then is the room's purpose, if it serves both saviour and saboteur with the same quiet compliance? Magic in the wizarding world often reflects the morality of its user. The Elder Wand chooses the most powerful. The Sorting Hat tries to find where a student truly belongs. Even the Mirror of Erist shows not just desire, but warns of obsession. Dumbledore himself cautioned Harry, "It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live." Yet the Room of Requirement, which listens more intimately than any artifact, seems to disregard this rule entirely. It does not weigh the cost of fulfilling a wish. It does not see the future its gifts may shape. The simplicity of its design becomes its curse. It hears a need, it fulfills it, no spell of consequence, no filter for darkness, and therein lies the problem. Need is not always born of good. A thief needs an exit, a murderer needs a weapon, a traitor needs a way in. Draco Malfoy, trembling beneath the weight of Voldemort's ultimatum, needed a repaired cabinet. The room, unthinking, gave it to him, and with that the walls of Hogwarts were breached not by brute force, but by silent permission. Consider how differently it behaved when others sought it with cleaner hearts. When Dobby needed space to hide Winky, the room created a small, cosy chamber with elf-sized beds. When Harry sought a place to train Dumbledore's army, it became a fully equipped training hall complete with cushions and bookcases. These transformations were benign, even noble. Yet when Draco required something sinister, the room transformed just as easily. Its power is not guided by conscience. It is pure potential that should terrify us. In its most complex form, the room becomes a vast storage chamber, a place where generations of Hogwarts students hid forbidden artifacts, dangerous books, hexed objects, poisoned cups. Even Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, long lost, rested there. It is no surprise then that such a space could hide something as damning as a repaired vanishing cabinet. The room collects secrets it never tells. It keeps the truth buried beneath layers of dust and darkness. Perhaps that is its truest magic, not generosity but concealment. When Harry later uses the room in Deathly Hallows to escape the clutches of the Carrows, it once again acts as saviour. It creates a sanctuary, it heals, it shields. But the same bricks and mortar once welcomed the very agents who brought horror into the school. This duality is not an accident. It is built into the fabric of the room. It is neutral, mechanical, obedient. And in a world as morally charged as the one Harry inhabits, that neutrality becomes dangerous. If the room cannot distinguish between right and wrong, should it be trusted at all? Or is that trust an illusion born of the good it happened to do in fortunate moments? Dumbledore never spoke of it publicly. The professors never set wards round it. Its power was known only to those desperate enough to stumble upon it. In this, it becomes a mirror, not of desire, but of the seeker's soul, and what it reflects it makes real. Yet the greatest tragedy is not that the room failed to protect. It is that no one questioned it. No one wondered whether such power should be so freely available, so easily exploited. Draco's use of the room did not simply end with the repaired cabinet. It led to the death of the man who built the Order of the Phoenix. It allowed Fenrir Greyback, a werewolf with no remorse, to step foot inside a school of children. It made the massacre of innocents possible, not with spells, but with silence. In the end, the Room of Requirement does not require anything of its own, not loyalty, not virtue, not even acknowledgement. It appears, it serves, it disappears. And in that disappearing act lies its absolution. No blame, no guilt, no reckoning. But we, the readers, are left with the reckoning. We must ask why a space that listens so carefully to need cannot hear the echo of evil in a request. Why does it empower without boundaries? Why does it allow horror to enter dressed as necessity? The room is not evil, but it is not good. It is a blank canvas, a tool, and like all tools in the wrong hands, it becomes dangerous. Magic, we are told again and again, is only as good as the one who wields it. But what of magic that wields itself? What of spaces that act without wisdom, that do not ask why, but only how? The Room of Requirement gave Draco Malfoy a key. He used it to open the gates of hell, and the room did not blink. Even years later, the question haunts us. If the room gave Draco the vanishing cabinet, what else might it give to those with darker ambitions? A child of Death Eaters seeking vengeance, a student obsessed with forbidden curses. The room would oblige, quietly, faithfully, without pause, because it does not know fear, it does not know regret, it knows only need. And in a world at war, need is the most dangerous magic of all. Number 21. Why does the room only respond to literal requests? In the heart of Hogwarts, hidden behind a blank stretch of wall on the 7th floor, lies one of the most enigmatic magical phenomena ever presented to a young wizard, the Room of Requirement. A place that appears only when a person truly needs it, shaped entirely by the thoughts and intentions of the seeker. It has offered sanctuary, training grounds, storage, and secret passageways. And yet, for all its grandeur, the room is built on a delicate paradox. Its power is limitless, but only within the boundaries of literal thought. It is a servant of the precise, not the abstract. A magical echo of one's conscious desire, but never a reader of deeper meaning. The room doesn't understand you, it only hears what you say. This contradiction comes to life most vividly when Draco Malfoy begins to use the room in Half-Blood Prince. Tasked with the nearly impossible mission of assassinating Dumbledore, Draco needs a place to repair the vanishing cabinet. He requests a hiding spot. The room answers, opening up its hidden identity as a hoarder's paradise, a vast collection of forgotten, discarded, and hidden items left by generations of students. It is massive, dusty, overflowing with junk and danger. Draco gets what he asked for, a place to hide something, not a workshop, not a secure laboratory, just a hiding place. This room could be almost anything, and yet it chose something so rudimentary and literal. The room didn't ask questions. It didn't consider why he needed to hide it or how delicate his task might be. It offered what was demanded, no more, no less. The room's limitation becomes even more critical when viewed through the eyes of Harry and his friends in Order of the Phoenix. Seeking a private space for Dumbledore's army to train, Harry imagines a secure room with cushions, books, and practice dummies. The room provides exactly that, but the moment they stop asking for a training room and instead need refuge, the room morphs accordingly. It never offers what's coming next. It never prepares for danger in advance. It waits to be instructed, then reshapes itself. Its magic is not proactive, it is reactive, and this reactive nature becomes a vulnerability. In the final book, Deathly Hallows, the trio relies heavily on the room while infiltrating Hogwarts. Needing shelter, they receive a chamber connected to the hidden world of those in rebellion. But again, the room only does what it is told. When Ron desperately asks for food, nothing appears. "I can't make food, not real food," Hermione reminds them, quoting Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration. But even beyond magical laws, the room could have offered connections, tools, knowledge, anything. Yet because Ron asked for food and not for a way to obtain it, the room stayed silent. It doesn't offer options. It doesn't interpret emotion. It is like a mirror to the surface of thought. This behavior invites a disturbing comparison to the trickster genie of fables. In those ancient tales, the genie grants 3 wishes, always with a twist. The wishes ask without precision, and the genie obeys in the most unhelpful way possible. A man asks for wealth and finds himself buried under gold bricks. A woman asks for beauty and loses her voice. The moral of those stories is always the same: be careful what you wish for. The Room of Requirement works on similar logic. Its loyalty is to syntax, not sentiment. It does not care if your wish leads you to ruin. It only answers the literal phrasing. This becomes painfully clear when Harry, desperate to locate Ravenclaw's diadem, asks for a place where everything is hidden. He returns to the same cluttered junkyard Draco once used. The room does not isolate the Horcrux or guide Harry to it with any divine spark of intuition. It simply opens the warehouse again. He passed the stuffed troll and the vanishing cabinet in which Montague had got lost the previous year. He spotted the chipped bust of an old warlock perched on a crate. Rowling writes, "The diadem is there, but buried in noise. The room gives Harry what he technically requested, not what he meant. He must search the overwhelming, chaotic mess himself, hoping to stumble on the truth buried in the trash." One must ask, then, why such a powerful magical structure is so rigid. If it can detect the nature of need, why is it deaf to tone, to context, to nuance? A room that understands the idea of requirement should surely grasp implication. And yet, when Harry later seeks a way to escape from Fiendfire during the battle, the room does not warn him or block the fire. It offers brooms, nothing more. They are saved only because Hermione and Ron think quickly. The room does not anticipate danger. It waits to be asked. What if, instead of being a source of divine insight, the room is a test, a magical challenge wrapped in benevolence? It doesn't help those who don't know how to help themselves. In a world where magic often feels limitless, the room is a reminder that the heart must be clear. Only those who can articulate their needs with clarity, wisdom, and restraint will receive true aid. Everyone else is left in the dark, or worse, led into false security. Its neutrality is part of its danger. The room doesn't care if the person asking is good or evil, desperate or greedy. It answered Draco just as quickly as it answered Harry. And this raises ethical questions. Should such magic be accessible at all? Is the room simply following ancient enchantments placed by founders who never expected such complexity of human emotion? Rowena Ravenclaw, often credited with creating the room, was said to prize logic and intelligence above all. Perhaps to her, the idea of a room answering only the literal made perfect sense. Only the most mentally disciplined could wield its power effectively. But Hogwarts changed, and the room did not. What began as a noble design became a dangerous artifact. We also must consider the contrast between the room and other sentient magical objects. The Sorting Hat, for example, actively reasons with its wearer. It listens, speaks, and even negotiates, as it did with Harry when he begged not to be placed in Slytherin. The hat had agency, it had voice. Even the Marauder's map speaks in its own way, refusing to reveal secrets to Severus Snape with an insult-laden message. but the room remains silent, obedient, mute. It does not communicate with words or even magical nudges. It has no moral compass, no guidance to offer. This silence becomes sinister in retrospect. When the Carrows take over Hogwarts and the school turns into a fortress of pain, why does the room not intervene? It could have hidden tortured students, it could have offered secret weapons, but it only does what is asked, not what is right. Neville Longbottom discovers how to make it a sanctuary, but only by trial and error. Not because the room sought to help, but because he found the right words. It's the only place that's left, Neville tells Harry. It doesn't need to be asked twice. This dependency on command over intuition reveals a deeper truth. The room is not a magical friend, it is a tool, powerful but blind, a servant, not a savior. It can manifest an entire world, but only if the blueprint exists in the mind of the summoner. It is magic without soul, architecture without insight, a mirror, not a guide. Why then has it not evolved? Magic in the wizarding world is shaped by tradition, but not static. Spells are improved, charms are enhanced, enchantments are updated, yet the room remains frozen in its ancient rigidity. Perhaps because no one knows how it truly works. Its origins are murky, undocumented. It appears as legend, then reality, then vanishes. Perhaps its very nature prevents improvement, or perhaps no one dares to tamper with it, fearing its collapse. The Room of Requirement stands as one of the most powerful magical locations in the Harry Potter universe, and yet it is also among the most misunderstood. It exposes the limitations of magic when divorced from empathy, of power when it lacks wisdom. It gives what is asked, not what is needed. And that is its greatest flaw and the most dangerous lesson it teaches. Number 22. Why doesn't the room appear on other magical devices? In a castle bursting with enchantments, shifting staircases and walls that whisper secrets, the Room of Requirement remains one of Hogwarts' most bizarre and unnerving phenomena. For a place that transforms itself according to the seeker's need, the room seems to operate on a different magical frequency, one that defies the established rules of detection, visibility, and even logic. While magical objects, such as the Marauder's Map, sneakoscopes, and various tracking spells are designed to identify presence, detect movement, or even sense deception, none of them react to the Room of Requirement. This is not a curious oversight, it's a glaring breach in magical accountability, one so dangerous it should have sent shockwaves through the Ministry of Magic. And yet, it didn't. Nobody questioned why this room exists in complete secrecy, invisible not just to the eye, but to the very pulse of magic itself. When Fred and George Weasley gifted Harry the Marauder's Map, they boasted that it showed everyone in Hogwarts. And they were right, except when it didn't. "The map never lies," Fred had said, and yet the Room of Requirement never appears, not when Harry's inside it, not when an entire army of students trains in Dumbledore's army, not when Death Eaters later patrol the hallways. The map shows secret passages, even animagi, but not this room. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," the user declares, and the parchment unveils everything except the one place that could harbour almost any secret crime or plot without a trace. There are magical devices that go far beyond enchanted parchment. Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, known for his paranoia and vigilance, used magical eyeballs capable of seeing through walls. He used dark detectors like the faux glass and sneakoscope. Yet there's no mention of such devices reacting to the Room of Requirement. When Professor Umbridge scoured the school with an iron will and a squad of inquisitorial goons, she still couldn't locate where Dumbledore's army was hiding. She interrogated, threatened, used the truth-telling serum Veritaserum, but all she got was blank stares. That room remained a ghost, unseen, unfelt, undetectable. This isn't just clever magic, it's dangerous loophole magic. Imagine a space that allows you to summon whatever you want, from cushions and books to horcruxes and basilisk venom, and then hides you from every eye, spell, and device in the wizarding world. In Half-Blood Prince, Draco Malfoy uses the Room of Requirement to fix the Vanishing Cabinet, plotting to smuggle Death Eaters into Hogwarts. He is not only successful, he remains completely undetected for months. Not even Dumbledore, who knew more about Hogwarts than any headmaster before him, managed to catch wind of Draco's activities. "I had to mend that broken Vanishing Cabinet," Draco confesses to Dumbledore on the Astronomy Tower. "I've been working on it for months." No one noticed because the Room of Requirement did exactly what its name implies, providing what was required, even if what was required was secrecy itself. And that raises the uncomfortable question, how can a room be invisible not just to human senses but to magical ones? Spells exist to trace disapparition, to track wand usage, to detect magical auras, to unveil the unplottable. Even the Fidelius charm, though powerful, can eventually be broken or undone. But the Room of Requirement is different. It's not unplottable in the traditional sense, it's unnoticeable. And no wizard, even the greatest, seems interested in addressing its unchecked power. This negligence is especially baffling given how obsessed the magical world is with control. The Ministry of Magic tracks underage magic. Hogwarts has a whole caretaker, Argus Filch, devoted to catching students sneaking into restricted areas. Enchanted chains, jinxed staircases, and moving portraits all contribute to maintaining order. But somehow this single room has carte blanche to ignore the rules. "No one ever knew all the secrets of Hogwarts," Dumbledore once mused, but in this case the ignorance isn't harmless, it's practically criminal. During the events of Deathly Hallows, the Room of Requirement becomes a hideout for the Resistance. Neville Longbottom, Dean Thomas and others live there, eating food conjured in secret, planning in whispers, protected from Death Eaters. On one hand, it's a heroic use of the room, but on the other, it underscores the danger. What if someone with darker intentions used the same protection? If Lord Voldemort had ever truly understood the room's magic, he could have used it to hide his Horcruxes, train Death Eaters, or summon dark artifacts beyond detection. In fact, he did use the room, albeit unknowingly. He hid the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw there, assuming it would never be found. He was right for decades. Even Dumbledore didn't think to look. Why then has no magical authority tried to regulate, study, or at the very least, observe the Room of Requirement? If this were the Muggle world, the equivalent would be a room that disables all surveillance, hides all heat signatures, blocks every signal, and even erases itself from memory. The Department of Mysteries exists to explore the deepest secrets of magic, love, time, death. But the Room of Requirement is never mentioned as one of their concerns. Is it because Hogwarts is sacred ground, or because no one dares question what's always been? The founders of Hogwarts were powerful, each with their own style of magic and philosophy. If the Room of Requirement is their creation, and it seems likely, it represents not just advanced magic, but a profound ethical blind spot. Magic that bends to will without judgment is already dangerous, but magic that bends to will and then vanishes from detection is something else entirely. It is anti-accountability. It is the magical equivalent of a locked server in a surveillance state. If Salazar Slytherin hid a basilisk beneath the school, could this room have hidden worse things? There is also the question of enchantment boundaries. Hogwarts itself is protected by ancient spells, anti-apparition charms, magical barriers, and detection wards. During the Second Wizarding War, even protective enchantments were cast around the castle by Professors Flitwick, McGonagall, and others. And yet none of these affected the Room of Requirement. It remained accessible, its magic untouched, its silence unbroken. If Voldemort had discovered its true potential, perhaps he would not have needed to destroy Gringotts or rely on traitors. He could have built an empire from within the walls of the very school that tried to resist him. Even magical portraits, known to gossip and observe, seem blind to the room's activities. The fat lady sees who enters Gryffindor Tower. Phineas Nigellus monitors Grimmauld Place, yet none report the strange disappearances of students slipping into a wall across from a tapestry. Peeves, the poltergeist, who delights in mayhem and secrets, never once leaks its existence. The house elves, devoted to Hogwarts, apparently never speak of it. Does the room erase memory, or does its magic extend to manipulating loyalty? And so the Room of Requirement stands not just as a helpful sanctuary or clever gimmick, but as a magical anomaly that resists every effort at categorization. It is more than a room. It is a riddle, a living loophole, a crack in the foundation of magical ethics. If magic is meant to be understood, studied, and responsibly used, then the Room of Requirement laughs in the face of that notion. It doesn't want to be known. It thrives in being forgotten. That should terrify everyone. Perhaps the saddest truth is that those who could have examined it, Dumbledore, Flitwick, even Hermione Granger, never made it a priority. The war came and went, and the room was used and abandoned like a tool. But the potential remains. If a single student today found the right need, they could open that room again and do anything, create a new dark mark, hide cursed objects, or simply disappear from every magical radar. Who would know? Who could stop it? And yet no spell has been invented to pierce its veil. No item sold in Diagon Alley warns of its use. It is as though the wizarding world collectively agreed to ignore a black hole in their own backyard. It raises questions about what else magic has hidden and what it still refuses to show. The Room of Requirement is not simply invisible. It is forbidden knowledge, not because it was outlawed, but because it was never truly understood. And maybe that's the real reason it terrifies us. Because in a world where magic can be measured, tracked, and explained, the Room of Requirement whispers one haunting truth. Some magic doesn't want to be found. Number 23. Why does the room have physical limitations? When the Room of Requirement first reveals itself to Harry Potter, it appears as a whimsical miracle, an enchanted sanctuary that molds itself to desire. In Order of the Phoenix, the room provides everything the Dumbledore's army members need: cushions for dueling practice, shelves of books about magical defense, a cozy fireplace, and even a whistle for summoning attention. Later, it conjures sleeping bags, beds, and food preparation areas. It is, as Dobby explains, a place that becomes whatever you need it to be. And yet, the illusion of omnipotence soon gives way to something far less convenient. As the stakes rise, the room begins to behave like any ordinary space, subject to destruction, invasion, and danger. Its walls can be set on fire, its ceilings can collapse, and worst of all, people can die inside it. This contradiction becomes most glaring in the Deathly Hallows when the room takes on the form of the Room of Hidden Things, a vast, cluttered expanse of forgotten objects where generations of Hogwarts students have concealed contraband and secrets. It is here, during the final battle, that the mystery of the room's limitations becomes impossible to ignore. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione enter the room in search of Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, they find it filled with towering piles of broken furniture, dusty books, and cages that once held magical creatures. But they are not alone. Draco Malfoy, Vincent Crabbe, and Gregory Goyle soon arrive, pursuing them with violent intent. What follows is chaos. Crabbe, in a moment of uncontrolled panic, casts the Fiendfire curse. The flames explode in monstrous serpents and dragons, devouring everything in their path. The room, this magical place of supposed safety and responsiveness, does nothing to protect its occupants. It becomes a death trap. This is where the room's magical logic breaks. If it can conjure thousands of beds, if it can seal itself off from detection by professors, if it can vanish doorways at will, why can't it create an emergency exit? Why doesn't it shield students from destructive magic? Why, when Crabbe's cursed fire ignites, does the room not transform into a water chamber or a vacuum or an escape tunnel? The fire kills Crabbe, nearly kills Malfoy and Goyle, and forces Harry and his friends to flee using only brooms they stumble upon in the junk heap. It is not the room that saves them, it is chance. It's not the first time this space behaves inconveniently. Even in Order of the Phoenix, the room can be oddly selective in what it allows. It doesn't open for Umbridge, it seems to react to intent, but the rules are opaque. Neville Longbottom, for example, is able to find the room again in Deathly Hallows, where it becomes the headquarters for the resistance against the Carrows, the Death Eater professors. It conjures sleeping quarters, lavatories, and even enough food to sustain dozens of students. But, despite this hospitality, the room cannot be reached by apparition, nor can it be summoned if a Death Eater is too close. The room, while magical, seems oddly tethered to physical laws and external threats. There is no explanation offered in the books for this contradiction. J.K. Rowling never elaborates on whether the room has a sentience of its own or simply responds like an automated spell. But the fact remains that the room behaves as if under a strange magical ceiling, a ceiling that becomes perilously low at the worst possible times. If the room was meant to be an all-powerful sanctuary, it fails spectacularly at the moment when sanctuary is most needed. What's more disturbing is the suggestion that the room is fallible, not just in battle, but in its judgment. It allows Crabbe inside with his wand drawn. It allows the casting of Fiend Fire, one of the most destructive spells known in the magical world, inside its walls. It does not suppress the curse, nor warn the occupants, nor eject them. This creates a disturbing paradox. A room that can generate enchanted swords and enchanted cushions, but cannot reject a dangerous spell. In effect, it is a space more magical than any wizard's home, and yet more vulnerable than a tent under a shield charm. Consider the fact that in Goblet of Fire, the champions are able to conjure water from nothing, protect themselves from dragons with spells, and transfigure objects into tools. Hogwarts is full of charms that prevent muggles from entering, hide entire rooms, and even create sentient paintings. So why is the Room of Requirement, which is supposed to adapt to needs, unable to recognize a need as obvious as "don't let fire kill a child"? It is not that the room is underpowered, it is selectively powerful. It can create a fireplace but not a firewall. It can provide training dummies but not magical shields. It can vanish doors but not threats. Even more baffling is that the room once produces the Sword of Gryffindor for Neville. This is a feat that, according to Deathly Hallows, only occurs when a true Gryffindor proves himself. If the room is capable of reaching into a Gringotts vault and producing a Horcrux-destroying weapon, then why can it not summon a simple trapdoor, an evacuation chute, or a portkey? These are minor feats in comparison. Either the room has limits it refuses to explain, or it has a will of its own, one that is both whimsical and cruel. What if the room is not simply neutral magic, but bound by ancient laws or flawed design? Hogwarts was built over 1,000 years ago, and the room may predate the current castle infrastructure. There is no indication that even the founders knew of it. Dumbledore only mentions it in passing, having once discovered it full of chamber pots. The room's discovery is always accidental, as if it wants to remain hidden. Perhaps its magic is patchwork, a result of layers of enchantment, half-finished spells, and ungoverned growth over centuries. In that case, its limitations aren't rules, they're symptoms of magical entropy. This theory also explains why the room doesn't always appear. Harry spends hours pacing the hallway in Half-Blood Prince, trying to gain access to Draco's version of the room, but nothing opens. This is not a failure of intent, it is a failure of access. The room seems to permit only one configuration at a time, a single-use interface that closes to all others until it resets. This is not convenience, it is vulnerability. When Draco locks himself in the room to use the vanishing cabinet, no one else can use it for anything else, not even for something as noble as planning a rebellion. Even the fire's aftermath leaves permanent scars. The entire hidden room is destroyed. Centuries of hidden objects, magical and mundane, are reduced to ash. There is no mention of the room regenerating, no sign that it will ever return to its former complexity. Its death is final. This finality is itself an answer. The room is not all-powerful. It is mortal, like a magical creature pushed beyond its endurance. Its gifts are temporary, and its mercy conditional. One must also wonder if the room was ever intended to be safe. Safety in the wizarding world is rarely absolute. Hogwarts itself, a school for children, houses a three-headed dog, a whomping willow, and a forest full of deadly creatures. Perhaps the room follows the same pattern, magic that teases security but never guarantees it. Even the Marauder's Map, another supposedly infallible tool, fails to show the Chamber of Secrets or Peter Pettigrew's treachery for years. The Room of Requirement fits comfortably into this pattern, a marvel that cannot be trusted. Its failure during the Battle of Hogwarts is especially tragic. Children are relying on it for survival. They sleep in its halls, whisper plans, and dream of salvation. And yet at the worst moment it does nothing. No alarms, no barriers, no magical redirection of the fiend fire. Even the spell that kills Crabbe, a child too, goes unchecked. In that moment, the room becomes not a place of requirement, but a place of consequence. The room's fallibility invites a deeper discomfort. If the magical world's most adaptable space cannot protect its users in times of need, then what hope is there for the rest of wizarding kind? If even enchanted stone can burn, where is safety? This question lingers longer than the flames of fiend fire. It remains as an ember in the heart of the story, quietly contradicting the comfort of magic. It is easy to think of the Room of Requirement as a gift, but perhaps it is a test, not of character, but of dependency. Wizards are told from childhood to rely on their wands, their spells, their institutions. But when all of that fails, when the room cannot provide, when spells cannot protect, the only defense left is each other. Harry saving Draco, Ron carrying Goyle. That is what endures when magic gives out. That is the true requirement. Number 24. Why didn't the room react to mass threats? The Room of Requirement had always been portrayed as a silent sentinel within the walls of Hogwarts, a room that sensed need, responded instinctively to unspoken desires, and materialized exactly what the seeker required. In Order of the Phoenix, it became a hidden training ground for Dumbledore's army. For Fred and George Weasley, it once transformed into a convenient broom cupboard to escape Filch. It could change shape, purpose, and content without a whisper of command. And yet, when the school was under siege in Deathly Hallows, when chaos thundered through every corridor, and when hundreds of students fought for their lives, its silence was deafening. The question hangs in the air like stale smoke after battle. Why didn't the room react? The final battle was not subtle. It was a catastrophic storm of spells, screams, and shattered stone. From the moment Voldemort summoned his forces to the Forbidden Forest, everyone at Hogwarts knew what was coming. Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout raised magical barricades. Centaurs watched from the forest's edge, giant spiders spilled from the trees, and yet the Room of Requirement made no move, no gesture of initiative. For a place so deeply entwined with human need, its passivity during the most desperate hours of the castle's history is troubling. Harry, Ron, and Hermione only accessed the room once during the battle, and only because they actively sought it out to find the lost diadem of Ravenclaw. The room transformed into the massive Room of Hidden Things, a vast expanse of forgotten objects and secrets. But it had not opened to offer sanctuary. It had not materialized of its own volition to shelter the wounded or to act as a passageway for evacuation. It had not expanded into a hospital wing or manifested protective barriers. It simply waited, cold and still, for someone to demand its help. When the trio enters, the room is inert, obedient only when summoned. "This is the place," Harry says, stepping over broken furniture and long abandoned belongings. "This is the room of requirement." It had become what they needed only after they had needed it loudly enough. But what of the children, the terrified first years whose spells sputtered in the face of trained Death Eaters? Did they not radiate enough need? What about the injured, the crying, the dying? Were their unspoken pleas insufficient? One might argue the room cannot act unless a person approaches it with conscious intent, but that assumption is shattered earlier in the series. In Half-Blood Prince, Dobby and Kreacher find Draco Malfoy entering the room frequently as he attempts to repair the vanishing cabinet. Malfoy never announces his intent to anyone. He doesn't tell the room out loud what he wants, and yet it opens for him, responds to him, hides him. So why didn't it react when students were crawling through rubble, or when Colin Creevey's lifeless body was dragged across the floor? The room had protected people before. It had hidden Draco, even as he plotted murder. It had shielded Dumbledore's army from Umbridge's spies and from the Inquisitorial squad. It had manifested sleeping bags, cushions, even a library of dueling books. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry describes it as a room that knows what you need, even if you don't. But in the most critical moment, when the entire school needed safety, healing, escape, it offered nothing. No flicker of light, no hum of awakening, no door in the wall. Even the house elves responded. Led by Kreacher, they charged into the fray with knives and cleavers. The centaurs, once passive observers, joined in. The statues and suits of armor came alive at McGonagall's command, but the room of requirement, that magical bastion of adaptability and aid, remained mute. It was as if it had been disconnected from the heart of the castle itself, as if someone, or something, had silenced it. A theory lingers like fog on the battlefield, that the room may have been compromised. In Half-Blood Prince, Malfoy uses it to hide his efforts to assassinate Dumbledore. He paces back and forth, and the room transforms accordingly. Perhaps, just perhaps, his tampering damaged something within it. The vanishing cabinet, an object of dark and unstable magic, resided there for months. Could its presence have disrupted the delicate balance that allows the room to sense need? But even if it was damaged, the room still opened for Harry later. It still transformed. It still obeyed. So then the question deepens. Was the room ever truly autonomous? Or is it merely a mirror, a reactive, not proactive, space that reflects human will rather than acting upon it? If so, then its reputation as a protector of the desperate is undeserved, and its mythology inflated by characters desperate to believe in hidden kindnesses. Consider Neville Longbottom. He led the resistance inside Hogwarts for months while Harry was on the run. He used the room of requirement as a base. It provided food, warmth, bedding. It created a living, breathing sanctuary for the last remnants of hope. It sheltered students who were punished by the Carrows. It kept them alive. But again, only because Neville had found it, only because he knew it could help. The room did not seek him out. It did not open its doors to screaming voices in the night. The idea of Hogwarts as a sentient being, alive in some magical way, is hinted at repeatedly. Staircases shift, portraits warn of intruders. The Sorting Hat possesses ancient intelligence. So why then in this living castle does the room of requirement behave like Deadstone in the hour of greatest need? Was it frightened? Can it feel fear? Or worse, was it indifferent? It's tempting to believe that the room knew its limits, that it had no healing spells to offer, that it could not distinguish friend from foe, that opening itself might have led Death Eaters to it, compromising the very students it sought to protect. But that is not how it behaved before. It was clever, elusive, even cunning. It moved doors. It changed shape. It kept secrets. Are we to believe that such a versatile, magical phenomenon was suddenly paralyzed by confusion? When Fred Weasley died, When Lavender Brown was mauled, when Remus and Tonks lay still in the great hall, was there not enough grief, enough desperation, enough raw human agony to stir the room into action? It had no problem responding to Harry's request to locate a Horcrux. It shifted its entire contents to match the room of hidden things, but that request served a grander purpose, a quest. Perhaps the room only answers when the asker has a purpose beyond fear. If that is true, then the room of requirement is no protector. It is a tool, useful but inert. It is not a hero. It is not a guardian spirit of the school. And that changes the way we remember it. It was never silent out of sorrow, but simply because no one gave it a voice. It had no initiative. It never did. It only ever responded. And in the end, perhaps it was never meant to be anything more. Still the question burns. If a room responds to need, then war should have shaken its foundations. Blood on the floors, screams in the staircases, was that not need enough? Or was the room, in its endless transformations, bound by an unspoken rule, that it could only serve when invited? That without the whisper of footsteps, it would remain folded inside the wall, just another secret waiting to be discovered? The silence of the room of requirement during the Battle of Hogwarts is more than a narrative oversight. It is a crack in the mythology of a castle that has always been portrayed as wise and watching. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that some magic, no matter how ancient, is passive, that sometimes it is not enough to hope. One must knock, one must walk the hallway, one must ask, because even the most miraculous of places may do nothing unless you demand something of them. Number 25. Why doesn't it defend itself from abuse? The Room of Requirement first appeared in the 5th book of the Harry Potter series, a hidden space that opens only when someone truly needs it. To the average reader, it seemed like a gift from fate, an enchanted sanctuary capable of fulfilling any need. But when one pauses to consider its true potential, a disturbing question arises. What happens if someone with malevolent intentions steps up to the wall, paces 3 times, and asks for something horrifying? This magical room, praised for helping Dumbledore's army and hiding sacred objects, might also be the perfect accomplice for dark deeds, and yet no mention is ever made of safeguards, filters, or limits. Is the Room of Requirement really just a tool, neutral and unthinking, willing to serve anyone who finds it? When Harry first used the room, he needed a space to teach his friends how to defend themselves. The room responded by offering cushions, books, practice dummies, and even a whistle. Later, when he needed to hide the Half-Blood Prince's potions book, the room offered an endless maze of hidden treasures, a graveyard of lost or hidden artifacts. But this is where the seed of unease begins to grow. Why did no one ask what else was buried in there? The room does not judge its users. It does not refuse. It only gives. Even the darkest of requests, it seems, would be honored. When Draco Malfoy needed a space to repair the vanishing cabinet in Half-Blood Prince, which allowed Death Eaters into the school, the room gave it to him without hesitation. No alarm. No resistance. The absence of magical safeguards is not just troubling, it's dangerous. Wizards and witches are known for experimenting with power. The Ministry regulates the use of spells, potions, and even magical creatures. Yet here lies a room more powerful than most magic shops combined, and it is completely unregulated. Imagine a young Tom Riddle, clever and cold, discovering the room in his final years at Hogwarts. If he asked it for a Horcrux forging altar, would it have provided one? Would the room conjure cursed knives, poisons that no spell can detect, or enchanted books containing forbidden knowledge? Given what we've seen, it seems that the answer is yes. There is no moral barrier in place. The scene in Deathly Hallows, when the trio returns to the room to search for Ravenclaw's diadem, reveals an even darker truth. What they find is not just lost homework or confiscated items, it's a chaos of secrets. Among the heaps are bloodied swords, rusted chains, cages, broken wands, and boxes that whisper when touched. These are not the possessions of innocent children. These are the remnants of obsession, fear, and perhaps even evil. The fact that these items still exist, protected by the room's enchantment, implies that its users in the past have already abused it. The Room of Requirement is not just a helper, it is an accomplice, silently guarding the shameful chapters of Hogwarts history. The most frightening example, however, is Draco's use of the room during the 6th book. He needed a place to fix a centuries-old vanishing cabinet, which would later be used to allow an armed invasion into the school. The room did not just offer a quiet corner, it supplied workbenches, tools, and the necessary privacy. It never questioned him, never tried to warn the teachers, never refused him access. A magical space with the intelligence to read thoughts did nothing to stop the most dangerous breach in the school's security in centuries. Its loyalty to need, and not to morality, made it complicit in a near disaster. And yet no one blames the room. One would expect a magical room of such power to have built-in moral logic, like the Elder Wand refusing an unworthy master, or the Marauder's map refusing to reveal itself to Snape. But the Room of Requirement lacks this layer of ethical reasoning. It operates like a vending machine. Feed it the correct emotion, and it grants your wish. There is no voice saying, "This is wrong." No barrier for misuse. A student could walk in and say, "I need a poison that leaves no trace," and the room would obey. Its magic, far from being wise, is almost blindly obedient. Even Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, seems to ignore this issue. While he acknowledges the room exists, he never attempts to regulate it. In Order of the Phoenix, he even allows students to train in it without questioning how it might be used later. But surely a man who feared the corrupting power of magic would see the potential threat here. He warns Harry constantly about power without wisdom, yet says nothing about the room's blank neutrality. Is it because even he does not understand how it works, or worse, does he understand it all too well and chooses to ignore the danger? Consider the twins, Fred and George Weasley. Known for their love of mischief and experimentation, they had access to the room. What if, instead of joke products, they had decided to cook up untraceable explosives or hexes powerful enough to paralyze a teacher? The room would not have denied them. In fact, it would likely have offered them the tools they needed, and no one would ever have known. This is the essence of the problem. The room operates in secrecy, grants total privacy, and has no record-keeping. It's the perfect hideout for anyone with harmful plans. The room's loyalty to need also opens a philosophical debate. What defines need? If a student believes they require a cursed artifact to survive a duel, does the room grant it? Is it the user's belief that shapes the outcome, or is the room interpreting some objective need? The books never clarify this, but based on Draco's success, it appears belief is enough. That's a dangerous precedent. The room, in this case, becomes a mirror for the user's morality, or lack thereof. If evil walks in, evil is rewarded. When the Carrows took control of Hogwarts in Deathly Hallows, the room became a refuge for those who resisted. It transformed into a magical bunker, providing food, warmth, and comfort. But what if it had also served the Carrows? If Amicus had paced the corridor and said, "I need a place to torture students without interruption," would the room have obeyed? Judging by its past behavior, it almost certainly would have. The room's neutrality is not a virtue, it is a flaw. Another disturbing moment is the discovery of the tiara Horcrux. It lay hidden in the room for years, untouched, undisturbed. Voldemort had used the room to conceal a piece of his soul, and no magic within the room detected or opposed this evil. If anything, the room helped him. It protected the Horcrux by burying it beneath a mountain of forgotten junk. This was not the act of a guardian. This was the act of a silent conspirator. The Room of Requirement is not evil, but it is not good either. It is pure function that makes it more dangerous than any sentient magical object. A creature may choose to disobey, a spell can be blocked, but the room listens, responds, and never speaks of what it has done. It is a vault for secrets, and like all vaults, it is only as good as the people who use it. The fact that it has no conscience is not just curious, it's terrifying. In the world of magic, even wands have allegiance. The Elder Wand, the Wand of Destiny, refuses to serve just anyone. The Sorting Hat tries to place students according to their character, but the Room of Requirement stands apart. It does not care if you're righteous or cruel, honest or deceitful. It is an echo chamber for desire, amplifying what the user believes they need. In that sense, it is more dangerous than any dark object, because it appears benign. It hides behind the mask of generosity. The books never directly address this flaw, perhaps because Rowling wanted the room to remain a tool for good, but the implications are clear. A magical construct that grants anything without judgment, without limit, and without consequence is a weapon. In the right hands, it is salvation. In the wrong ones, it is catastrophe. Hogwarts hides many secrets in its walls. The Room of Requirement may be the most frightening of all, not because of what it is, but because of what it doesn't stop. Number 26. Why doesn't it remember regular users? The Room of Requirement was the beating heart of Dumbledore's army, the secret sanctuary where Harry, Hermione, and Ron returned time and again in desperate need. And yet, no matter how often they used it, the room never responded to them with any particular familiarity. Each encounter was as though it were the first. There were no shortcuts, no signs of recognition, no easing of entry. Harry would pace in front of the stretch of blank wall 3 times, thinking clearly and desperately of what he needed. Only then would the room appear, obedient but impersonal. For a place that seemed almost alive, the Room of Requirement behaved as if it had no memory at all. This absence of memory stood in stark contrast to the rest of Hogwarts, where portraits carried on conversations and remembered students from decades past, where the castle itself seemed to shift and pulse with ancient understanding. The fat lady guarding the Gryffindor common room knew the habits of its residents and commented on their behavior. Even Peeves, the chaotic poltergeist, had personal grudges and remembered individual students with gleeful malice. But the Room of Requirement, for all its power and magic, was coldly neutral. It gave what was needed and then vanished, as if the person inside had never existed. Harry had used the room during his 6th year to hide the Half-Blood Prince's copy of advanced potion-making, and yet, when he returned to it in the 7th book, there was no indication that the room recognized him or his intention. The version of the room used for Dumbledore's army was entirely separate, a new manifestation that existed alongside an infinite number of possible versions. "Sometimes you've got to demand it," Harry had said in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, but demanding didn't bring intimacy. It only brought compliance. The room provided what was asked for, nothing more. Hermione, the most analytical of the trio, never once commented on this lack of continuity. That alone is telling. A girl who noticed everything, who could spot the smallest inconsistencies, who questioned why house elves weren't paid for their labor, never asked why the Room of Requirement didn't remember her. She was the first to realize that the room could be used for meetings, yet even after dozens of visits, she had to summon it anew each time. It never appeared of its own volition, no affectionate welcome, no intuitive sense of the user's identity. The room was a blank slate every time. One might argue that this was by design, that the room needed to be impersonal to protect its secrets. But even impersonal things in the wizarding world often had feelings. Wands, for example, chose their owners and reacted with loyalty. "The wand chooses the wizard," Ollivander said, and wands could remember betrayals and attachments. House elves, technically bound servants, showed fierce devotion. Even the Sorting Hat remembered students and could reference past conversations. But the Room of Requirement stood apart, uniquely devoid of sentiment. What makes the room especially puzzling is its intuitive nature. It doesn't require a spell, it responds to need. It creates spaces tailored to the person's deepest desires. That level of magic implies awareness. When Neville needed shelter in Deathly Hallows, it provided food, warmth, and beds. It gave Luna a place to paint friends on the ceiling. It produced the room of hidden things for generations of students who needed to dispose of dangerous secrets. How can something so perceptive, so attuned to the soul of the seeker, be simultaneously so forgetful? Perhaps the most haunting example comes during the Battle of Hogwarts. When Harry re-enters the room of hidden things to search for Rowena Ravenclaw's lost diadem, the room is completely unchanged from Tom Riddle's visit decades earlier. The diadem still rests in the same cabinet, untouched. The rest of the room is a mountain of forgotten objects, a graveyard of memories. It remembers what people have left, but not who left them. Tom Riddle's dark presence is encoded into the Horcrux, not the room itself. It is the object, not the space, that holds the echo of the past. The room's emotional sterility is especially painful when contrasted with Hogwarts as a whole. The castle is known for its loyalty. Dumbledore himself once said, "Help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it." And yet the room doesn't offer help unless summoned with precision. Harry couldn't find it open at random. It didn't sense danger and appear. He had to walk, think, plead. If the room had memory, if it loved him as the castle seemed to, wouldn't it make itself more accessible? Wouldn't it recognize the boy who needed it more than anyone? There is something deeply unsettling in the idea that such a powerful, magical place could lack attachment. In Deathly Hallows, the room gives Neville and the DA a place to hide from the Carrows, but even then, it doesn't initiate the connection. Neville discovers the room through trial and desperation. "It's the only place left," he says. He doesn't imply that the room invited him in or remembered the DA's cause. It simply responded to need like a reflex, not like a friend. The room's neutrality also blurs the line between object and being. Magic in the Harry Potter universe often occupies a strange grey area. The Marauder's map can recognize people by name and location, suggesting sentience. The Mirror of Erised shows desire and yet cannot act. The Room of Requirement, by contrast, acts, creates food, space, oxygen, but shows no preference. It is the most powerful magic in the series that still lacks identity. That contradiction is haunting. A sentient room with no memory, a sacred place with no soul. There's even a subtle cruelty to this. Harry, who lost his parents and found home only in Hogwarts, never forms a bond with the room beyond its utility. He speaks of it the way a general speaks of a weapon, useful, necessary, dangerous. He hides things in it, he trains soldiers in it, he seeks power in it. But he never trusts it, and perhaps that's wise, because the room never once reaches out to him. It never changes its nature, never becomes easier to access, never softens toward its most desperate visitor. Even Creature, a bitter old house elf, learned to love Harry. The room did not. This lack of memory may have been what doomed it. When Vincent Crabbe casts the fiend fire that destroys the room in Deathly Hallows, the space burns without resistance. It doesn't protect the treasures hidden within it. It doesn't warn its guests. It dies like an empty shell. In the end, the room that served so many and offered refuge to hundreds is reduced to rubble. And it does not fight back. It does not cry out. It simply ceases to exist. A tool discarded, not a friend mourned. Even magical places in the series often express emotion. The Shrieking Shack trembles with memories of pain. The Forbidden Forest pulses with ancient magic. Grimmauld Place bears the weight of sorrow and pride. But the Room of Requirement is always pristine. Its walls reveal nothing. Its transformations are without personality. It serves but never connects. In a world of living portraits, talking hats, and loyal staircases, the Room of Requirement remains a ghost, present but never truly there. And what does this say about the nature of magic itself? If the most powerful spaces in the wizarding world can be this impersonal, is magic inherently cold? Is the warmth we feel in spells and objects simply our own projection? The Room of Requirement raises a philosophical question buried in the heart of Hogwarts. Is magic a mirror or a mind? Does it reflect our needs or feel them? The room gives what is asked, but it never asks anything in return. And perhaps that is its flaw. For Harry, who longed for connection, the room offered only functionality. For Hermione, who sought knowledge, the room offered space but no answers. For Ron, who needed belonging, the room never became more than a venue. In the end, the Room of Requirement did not remember them, not because it couldn't, but because it wouldn't. And maybe that's the real tragedy, because when everything else in Hogwarts seemed to care, the most generous magic of all chose not to. Number 27. Why does the room create real objects, and where do they go? The Room of Requirement in the Harry Potter universe has long stood as one of the most enigmatic magical locations within Hogwarts. On the surface, it is a place of opportunity, one that transforms itself into whatever the seeker most urgently needs. But beneath its magical adaptability lies a perplexing inconsistency that becomes harder to ignore the more we examine it. The objects it creates are real. They are not illusions, nor temporary holograms, nor ethereal shadows. They are physical, tangible items that can be touched, used, even consumed. And this raises a disturbing question: where do these things come from? And more importantly, where do they go? In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, we first see the room serving Dumbledore's army. Inside it manifests cushions, spellbooks, dueling dummies, and even a whistle. These are not mere decorative illusions, they are used daily in rigorous training sessions. The cushions are blasted across the room, the dummies are battered with jinxes, and the books contain full written pages. Hermione flips through them, she even reads from them aloud. "Look, this one has a whole section on shield charms," she says. "The books seem to contain knowledge, as if they were written and printed by a wizarding publisher. But who wrote them? Who printed them? Are they copied from the library's collection? Created from scratch? The text never says." And yet we, like the students, accept their existence without question. Later, in Half-Blood Prince, the Room of Requirement reveals an entirely different version of itself, the Room of Hidden Things. Here, the chamber stores centuries' worth of forgotten, lost, or deliberately stashed objects. Broken furniture, shrunken heads, cauldrons, magical cabinets, old robes, even tiaras, all real, all decaying with time. This is where Draco Malfoy hides the vanishing cabinet and where Harry later finds the lost diadem of Ravenclaw. The room, in this form, does not just generate things, it preserves them. These are not temporary, they have aged, they rot, they can be moved, burned, damaged, and repaired. These things possess continuity. So what happens when a student takes an object out of the Room of Requirement? If the item is conjured in the moment to fulfill a need, say, a blanket, a snack, or a quill, does it persist after leaving the room? In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry and the DA are training, it's unclear whether students ever remove objects from the room, but we do know that Harry and Ron eventually stash the Half-Blood Prince's potion book in the Room of Hidden Things. The fact that they can do this implies that external items brought in can remain there indefinitely. So the flow works both ways, but does it mean that the room's own creations can leave? And if so, are they permanent additions to the material world? One peculiar case appears in Deathly Hallows when Harry, Ron, and Hermione return to the Room of Requirement during the Battle of Hogwarts. The room transforms into the labyrinth of hidden things once more, and again they retrieve something real, the lost diadem which Voldemort had turned into a Horcrux. That diadem is not created by the room. It had been hidden there for decades, but in the same sequence we also see the room spontaneously adjust itself to assist the trio's escape. It creates exits, platforms, and paths. If the room can manipulate solid architecture, why couldn't it also create consumable goods like food or firewood, as it does elsewhere? The strangest revelation comes when we learn that the room can indeed produce food, something that is supposedly impossible to conjure from nothing, according to the 5 principal exceptions to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration. In Deathly Hallows, when Dumbledore's army is hiding in the room during the occupation of Hogwarts, the chamber provides them with food. Luna Lovegood explains that the room takes the food from the kitchens, thus bypassing Gamp's law. But this implies the room is not creating food ex nihilo, but transporting it, a significant distinction. Still, it offers no explanation for the objects conjured during DA lessons, the books, the cushions, the dummies. This leads us to a critical inconsistency in the room's behavior. If the room can summon existing food from the kitchens, is it likewise duplicating other objects from nearby sources? Are the spellbooks summoned from the Hogwarts library? Are the cushions borrowed from the Gryffindor common room? If so, why are they not missed? Why does no one complain of vanishing library tomes? And more importantly, why do the conjured items behave as if they've never existed before, pristine, untouched, ready for use? Perhaps the strangest implication is what happens after. If a student leaves the room carrying a conjured object, a pillow, a parchment, a snack, what becomes of that item? Does it vanish after a time like items conjured via the summoning charm, or does it persist free from the room's control? The series never shows us a student walking out with one of these objects, but the possibility is left hauntingly open. If someone walked away with a magical item created by the room, are they essentially stealing from a magical source? Would the room retaliate? Would the object decay into nothing? These questions linger uncomfortably without answers. There is also the troubling matter of magical ethics. If the room can generate real objects, is it creating them out of nothing? That would directly violate Gamp's law unless the room uses transfiguration to alter existing matter. But from what? Air, stone, dust? If so, does that mean the walls of Hogwarts are slowly being transfigured into training equipment and books? It seems absurd, but not impossible. And if not, is the room tapping into some deeper well of raw, magical potential, creating physical things the way a god might conjure reality? That would place the Room of Requirement among the most powerful magical constructs ever devised. And yet no one seems concerned. Dumbledore uses the room. Dobby the elf finds it helpful. Even Neville relies on it for sanctuary. None of them pause to ask the basic question, where do the objects come from and where do they go? This lack of curiosity is baffling in a world so often obsessed with magical laws and their limitations. Why hasn't Hermione researched this? Why didn't Dumbledore study the room more deeply? Is the room somehow enchanting the minds of those who use it, dulling their sense of inquiry? It may also be significant that the room only appears to those who truly need it. This implies a level of magical discernment bordering on sentience. If the room is alive or at least self-aware, it may create only what it deems safe or appropriate. It might retrieve a book from the library for someone studying, but not a weapon for someone seeking to harm. Yet even that theory is contradicted when we consider the vanishing cabinet. Draco Malfoy uses the room to hide a dangerous magical device. It doesn't stop him, it enables him, and that calls the entire moral compass of the room into question.